So we finally have another development build of LEGO Island, the pre-alpha. Now, I've known about this for quite some time, there's been video footage online for over a year, but it was otherwise being kept under wraps by a small group of people. I certainly never had it. And the circumstances around its sudden leak are kind of strange. It seems someone anonymously sent this to another YouTuber by the name of RR Slugger, and then he released it. I don't know if he knew it was being kept private or who sent it to him, but it's out now, so let's take a look at it. Now, if you want to see my initial reaction, I actually streamed this the day it came out, so I'll leave a link to the VOD in the description, and obviously if you want to see more stuff like that, give me a follow over at twitch.tv/MattKCLive. The files are dated October 1996, just under a year before the final release, and about 9 months or so from the final beta, which is pretty much the finished game minus a few quality of life improvements. Let's see what 9 months can do. Immediately, the installer is different. This is actually a carbon copy of the Chessmaster 5000 installer, with the Chessmaster guy removed and the text crudely replaced. This thing is 16-bit, so it won't run on most modern systems, and it even has trouble in Wine, despite the fact it runs 16-bit apps. If you do want to try this on a modern OS, the install process is not complicated. You can set up the files and registry entries yourself, but fellow LEGO Island conspirator Ramen2X also built a modern installer for it that'll set up everything correctly too. The next thing you'll find if you want to change some graphics options is that there are none. It's an MFC dialogue just like the final game, but clearly they haven't done it yet. Instead, all the graphics options are here in the game's launcher. This is the main hub of the game. It consists of only these 5 rooms, which is all 4 build sections and the overworld. The build sections seem pretty much complete. Each one is fully playable and very closely resembles the final game with only slight tweaks here and there. But there are some more notable differences. There's no building appearance, and when you're done, nothing happens, you just have to manually close the game. You'll also notice the music and sound effects are completely different. The song, which is the same in each one, is an excerpt from Lego Mania, an ultimately unused cue composed by Lauren Nelson, though I'll be honest, at first I assumed it was just some generic stock music track like the elevator theme. Especially because for a track written just for this game, it's looped very, very crudely. Well, let's not be too critical, obviously this is a work in progress we're looking at here. The sound effects are definitely worse. They inexplicably have an entire plane take off as the rotating sound. They also have this wireframe, which is actually kinda cool. I can see why it might have seemed too ugly or confusing for the final release, but I almost wish there was an option to enable it. I guess we could always add one ourselves. The 2D animated sprites are a little glitchy, they flicker when you click them. Not sure what that's all about. Overall though, I mean, this is the game, at least this part of it. October 1996 and the build sections are already 95% done. Let's move on to the island. This is where things become a lot more noticeably different. Graphically, it looks similar to the build from July 1996, though the colors have changed a little, and unlike that build, the layout of the island is pretty much what we got on release. There are very few buildings. We've got the 3 houses in the residential area and the gas station, which was the only building in July 1996 as well. And like the July 96 build, there's still no collision, so you can just walk through buildings. There's no paths, so you can just walk on the grass. There's no trees, there's no NPCs, and even the ramps don't work. You have to use the U and D keys to raise your height up and down manually. You can also tilt the camera up while you're on them to better approximate the effect, so I guess all the building blocks for the final control scheme are there, they just haven't all been fit together yet. Oh yeah, and the turning is even worse. Seems like they're using keyboard APIs for typing to do this. It's hard to describe, but watch as I hold down a key. It repeats like it would in a text editor. In fairness, this would have been an early implementation of keyboard control because the July build doesn't have any. In general, keyboard input was considered secondary. In all behind-the-scenes videos, you see the developers primarily used mouse control, which is indeed much more fluid. That being said, since this relies on your key repeat rate, it actually isn't tied to the frame rate, so there is that. On the more developmental side of things, what we're playing here is the original main.exe executable. This is what they used during development, and compared to the final isle.exe that we got, this gives us a ton of debugging features, allowing us to mess around with timing, volumes, and load anything from NESI file. Through this, we can find another launcher for the build sections that ultimately went unused. And yes, all of the buttons do work, but they can be a little glitchy. Sometimes they stay on even after loading a room and remain clickable, allowing you to load into 2 build sections at the same time. Oh god. The disk also contains both release and debug builds of a lot of the executables, the first debug builds we've ever seen. That being said, it does not contain symbols. Microsoft's Visual C++ compiler always places symbols in a sidecar PDB file rather than in the executable itself, and there is no such PDB file on the disk. That being said, the debug builds are still potentially useful because they'll contain things like assertions and unoptimized code that may indeed help us with the decompilation. Finally, and I think we can all agree this is the most important part, there's an option to register and get some free fonts. Epic. The registration obviously doesn't work anymore, but if you browse the disk, you'll soon find you can run the font installer on its own and completely bypass the registration. Sick! I've already updated SIEdit to handle this version's SI files if you want to peruse them for assets. Interestingly, they were still storing the 3D models in the SIs at this point, still streaming them off the CD rather than installing them to the hard drive. I've also written up a Wiki article with more screenshots and detail if you'd like to read through that. Feel free to add anything if I missed it. So yeah, that's the pre-alpha, at least everything I found. It's always fun to see development stages of a game that I'm all too familiar with.